There's a room inside the Great Pyramid that should not have been possible to build. It sits above the king's chamber, hidden in the dark, and inside it are 5 granite beams, each one weighing close to 80 tons. That is heavier than a fully loaded freight train car, heavier than a blue whale, and somebody lifted 5 of them, one after another, nearly 200 feet into the air, using nothing that we would call a machine. No engine, no pulley system as we understand it, no crane, just ropes, wood, sand, water, and thousands of human hands. Archaeologists agree the pyramid was built by the ancient Egyptians. Nobody serious is arguing about who ordered it built or roughly when. The mystery is not who, the mystery is how. And the deeper you go into the actual engineering, the stranger the how gets. Because for 100 years now, experts have been able to explain maybe 80% of the process with real confidence, and the last 20% keeps slipping through their fingers. Let's start with the number that should stop anyone in their tracks. 2.3 million blocks of stone, some as small as a suitcase, some as heavy as a bus, stacked into a structure 481 feet tall, built in roughly 20 years, according to the timeline most Egyptologists accept. Do the math on that, and it comes out to laying more than one block every 3 minutes, day and night, for 2 decades straight without a single day off, if you want the numbers to work cleanly. Nobody thinks it actually happened at a perfectly even pace like that, but even allowing for faster and slower seasons, for the flooding of the Nile, for religious festivals, the sheer speed of construction is one of the first things that genuinely puzzles specialists, not because it is impossible, because it required a level of logistics, of organized labor, of food supply, of tool production, that we are still mapping out piece by piece. For a long time, popular imagination pictured slaves dragged in chains, dying under the whip, building a tomb for a tyrant. That image is mostly Hollywood, and modern archaeology has actually corrected it in a way that is honestly the opposite of mysterious and the opposite of dark. In the 1990s, archaeologists uncovered an entire town at the base of the Giza Plateau. Bakeries, breweries capable of producing enormous quantities of beer, which was a wage, not a treat. Barracks that could house thousands of workers. Enormous piles of cattle, sheep, and goat bones, showing these workers ate meat regularly, which in the ancient world was closer to a privilege than a punishment. And most striking of all, a cemetery where the skeletons of workers show healed fractures, broken legs and arms that were set, splinted, and given time to mend. You do not spend resources healing a slave you consider disposable. You heal a valued worker. So on the question of who built it and under what conditions, we actually have a strong, evidence-backed, almost reassuring answer. Skilled paid laborers, rotating in shifts, likely organized around agricultural cycles, proud enough of their work that gangs painted their own nicknames on blocks deep inside the structure. Names like Friends of Khufu, essentially ancient graffiti that said, in effect, we were here, we built this, we were good at it. So, if we know who, and we increasingly know how they lived, where does the real mystery live? It lives in 3 specific, unresolved engineering problems that professional archaeologists, not internet conspiracy channels, actively argue about at conferences to this day. And the first is the ramps, the second is the granite, the third is the tools and the tolerances. Let's take them one at a time, because each one on its own is genuinely strange, and together they form one of the most stubborn open questions in the history of engineering. Start with the ramps, because everything about moving 2.3 million blocks depends on solving this first. Everyone agrees the Egyptians used some kind of ramp system to drag blocks upward, since cranes did not exist, and there is zero evidence of anything resembling a pulley strong enough for stones this size. The disagreement is about what those ramps actually looked like, and it is not a small disagreement. It is a real, ongoing academic fight. One school of thought says there was a single straight ramp running from the ground up one face of the pyramid, getting longer and longer as the structure rose. The problem with that idea is brutal and simple. If you do the math on a straight ramp long enough and gentle enough in slope for workers to actually drag multi-ton blocks up it, by the time the pyramid reaches its final height, the ramp itself would need to be almost a mile long, would require more material than the pyramid itself, and there is no trace of it anywhere in the archaeological record, not a scrap. Sand does not just vanish that completely, so most researchers have abandoned the single straight ramp for the upper 2/3 of the structure, but nobody can prove exactly what replaced it. A second theory says the ramp spiraled around the outside of the pyramid as it rose, wrapping the structure like a corkscrew. This solves the length problem, but creates a new one. It would have covered the corners, making it almost impossible for workers to check the accuracy of the pyramid's edges and angles as they built upward, which does not match how precise the finished structure turned out to be. A third theory, which has gained real traction in the last 15 years from French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, proposes an internal spiraling ramp tunneled through the body of the pyramid itself, invisible from the outside, that the builders sealed up and hid once construction finished. Ground-penetrating radar and microgravimetry surveys in the 2000s picked up some intriguing anomalies inside the structure that could be consistent with this, but nobody has been willing to drill into the Great Pyramid to confirm it, for the obvious reason that you do not go poking holes in one of the most significant structures on Earth to satisfy a hypothesis. So this argument is not settled. 3 respected theories, each with real engineers and real archaeologists behind them, each with real holes in it and no final answer. That is not internet mystery mongering. That is an open question in a peer-reviewed journal. Now here is where it gets genuinely thrilling. Because in 2013, something was found that finally gave us a piece of hard, physical contemporary evidence about how at least some of this worked. And it came from the most unglamorous source imaginable, a diary. Archaeologists excavating a set of caves near the Red Sea coast discovered a collection of papyrus fragments, the oldest inscribed papyrus ever found in Egypt, written by a man named Merer, an official who led a team of around 40 workers. Merer's papyrus is essentially a logbook, a daily record of his crew's work, and it describes hauling limestone blocks by boat along the Nile and a specially dug canal system directly to the Giza Plateau, timed to the annual flooding of the river, which would have allowed boats to get much closer to the construction site than the river's natural course allows today. This single discovery answered a question people had debated for a century. How did they get the outer casing stones quarried from Tura across the river to the site efficiently? The answer was water, timed precisely to nature's calendar, moving stone using the flood itself as a machine. It is one of the few times in Egyptology where a genuine mystery got closed by a single find. But Merer's diary only covers part of the puzzle. It tells us about moving finished blocks to the site. It does not tell us how they lifted 80-ton granite beams 200 feet into the sky once they got there, and that is where the second real mystery lives. The granite is where this gets almost uncomfortable because the numbers do not soften no matter how you approach them. That granite for the king's chamber and the relieving chambers above it was not quarried locally. It came from Aswan, more than 500 miles south, cut using nothing but stone hammers called dolerite pounders, some copper tools for finer work, and enormous patience. Quarry marks at Aswan today still show the ancient technique. Workers pounded grooves into the rock by hand, over and over, for what must have been months per block, to slowly separate a slab of solid granite from the bedrock. Granite is roughly 3 times harder than limestone. It is not a soft stone that gives way easily to a copper chisel. Copper is actually softer than granite, which is part of why this process is so labor-intensive and so slow to have produced results this scale. Once cut, these multi-ton granite beams had to travel 500 miles down the Nile by boat, then be dragged from the riverbank to the pyramid, then lifted, level, and precisely seated nearly 200 feet in the air in a chamber designed specifically to distribute the crushing weight of millions of tons of stone above it without collapsing. And it worked. That ceiling has not cracked or come down in over 4,500 years. Through earthquakes, through erosion, through everything. Structural engineers today, when they actually study the load-bearing design of those relieving chambers, describe it with real respect, because whoever designed that system understood how to redirect enormous compressive force away from a hollow space using nothing but the geometry of stacked stone. No steel reinforcement, no concrete, no modern materials science. Just an extremely precise understanding of how weight travels through rock, how the builders modeled that in advance, whether through mathematics, through trial and error on smaller structures, or through knowledge passed down that we have simply lost the written record of, is genuinely not fully understood. And it is a legitimate subject of ongoing structural and archaeological research, not a fringe claim. Then there is the third mystery. And this is the one that quietly bothers precision engineers the most, because it does not require you to believe anything exotic. It only requires you to look at the numbers and try to reproduce them with the tools the record says were available. The base of the Great Pyramid, spread across more than 750 feet on each side, is level to within about 2 centimeters. The 4 sides are oriented to true north with an accuracy of a few arc minutes, meaning the alignment error is smaller than the width of your finger held at arm's length against the horizon. Achieving that kind of leveling and orientation using a wooden square, a plumb line, and a trough of water to find level ground. And holding that accuracy consistently across a footprint the size of 10 football fields is something that modern surveying teams have actually tried to replicate using only ancient-style tools, and it is hard. Not impossible. Researchers have shown plausible methods using star sightings and water levels that could theoretically achieve this, but hard, in the sense that it demands extraordinary discipline, repeated verification, and almost no room for the kind of human error that creeps into any large hand-built project. This is where honest archaeologists split into 2 camps that are not actually as far apart as they sound. One camp says the ancient Egyptians were simply far more skilled, far more patient, and far more organized with basic tools than modern people tend to assume, and that we underestimate pre-industrial engineering because we are used to machines doing our precision for us. The other camp says, yes, that is true, but we still do not have a fully reconstructed, tested start-to-finish method that explains every step of achieving this accuracy at this scale, and until someone actually replicates the entire process, from quarry to final capstone using only period-accurate tools, the question stays technically open. Both camps agree on the facts. They disagree on how comfortable we should be with the current explanation. What almost nobody serious argues, and this matters, is that the pyramid required knowledge or technology that did not exist anywhere in the ancient world. The Egyptians were not primitive. By the time of the Great Pyramid, Egyptian civilization already had centuries of experience building in stone, developing increasingly ambitious structures, learning from failures. The bent pyramid at Dashur, built just before Khufu's pyramid, is physical proof of trial and error. Partway through construction, the angle of its sides was changed, almost certainly because the original steep angle was causing structural stress and cracking, visible today in the internal chambers. That is not the signature of people who mysteriously possessed perfect knowledge from the start. That is the signature of engineers learning in real time, making a mistake, recognizing it, and correcting course, which is exactly what real engineering history looks like everywhere else in the world too. There is one more genuine debate worth mentioning honestly, because it gets dragged into sensational territory constantly, but does have a real, if very much minority, scientific basis. Some geologists, most notably Robert Schoss from Boston University, have argued for decades that the weathering patterns on the enclosure walls around the Sphinx look more consistent with prolonged water erosion, heavy rainfall over a very long period, than with the wind and sand erosion typical of Egypt's climate for the last several thousand years. If that reading is correct, it would push the carving of at least the Sphinx's core body back to a much wetter climate period. This idea is not accepted by the majority of Egyptologists and geologists, who point to alternative explanations involving the specific composition of the limestone layers and more recent flash flooding events, and it is important to say clearly that this remains a minority position, actively disputed, not a settled finding. But it has never been fully dismissed either, because the core geological observation, the specific pattern of vertical erosion channels, is real and has never been fully explained by either side to the total satisfaction of the other. It sits exactly where a genuine open scientific debate sits, unresolved, argued by credentialed people on both sides, waiting on either better dating methods or new physical evidence to move it one way or the other. So where does that leave us? Not with aliens. Not with a lost super-civilization erasing all its own evidence except one building. Not with secret messages encoded for a future that would only understand them with satellites. It leaves us with something arguably more impressive, which is a Bronze Age society that organized tens of thousands of skilled, paid, well-fed workers, developed a logistics network sophisticated enough to time boat shipments to the flooding of a river, engineered load-bearing structural systems that modern engineers still study with respect, and achieved a level of precision in leveling and alignment that we can only partially explain even now, using tools no more advanced than rope, wood, copper, and water. The mystery is not that something impossible happened at Giza. The mystery is that something extraordinarily difficult happened, was pulled off successfully, and we still cannot fully reconstruct every step of exactly how. That gap between knowing the what and not fully knowing the how is where real archaeological mystery lives, and honestly, it is more interesting than any manufactured one, because it is a mystery about human beings, thousands of years ago, doing something that still humbles the people who study it professionally today. The ramps question is still open. The full lifting method for those 80-ton granite beams is still debated. The exact technique behind that leveling precision has never been fully replicated, start to finish, under period conditions. Real archaeologists, real structural engineers, real geologists are still working on these three questions right now, publishing papers, running experiments, arguing at conferences, because these are not solved problems dressed up as mysteries for entertainment. They are actual, unresolved questions inside one of the most heavily studied structures on the planet. And maybe that is the more honest kind of amazement to sit with. Not that something unexplainable happened, but that human beings, 4,500 years ago, with nothing but rope and stone and water and each other, did something that still, genuinely, has not been fully explained.